I'd call this work session, or this work session relative to 2017-94 and 94S. Go around the table, identify ourselves for the record.
Christopher Constant, Felix Rivera,
Suzanne LaFrance.
Pete Peterson.
John Weddleton.
Dick Training.
Forrest Dunbar.
Chris Schutte, Office of Economic and Community Development.
Brian Marino, Parking Director, ACDA. Andrew Humper, Executive Director, ACDA.
Is anybody on the phone line right now? Pretty many. Forrest, we'll turn the time over to you. Would you finish with the S version?
Sure. So I think what I'd like to do is give a brief intro to the topic and then let Easy Park and ACDA describe their plans and what they want to do. And then after that, maybe describe how I came to the S version for those that maybe read the original. So for those that remember, last summer we had a discussion about raising the rates on the meters downtown and also charging on Saturdays. And there was a fairly large public outcry, and myself included, sort of opposed particularly the Saturday charging. But we allowed the ACDA Easy Park went forward with the increased fares of the meters downtown. And at that time, I had expressed to managers specifically that I was concerned about this DUI issue. And then I started to hear some sort of rumors and rumblings that they were going to go forward again with charging Saturdays this year. And this past week, they came forward with this plan that doesn't charge, but does have 2-hour enforcement on Saturdays. And so I guess my first desire would be to, last summer, we didn't have any kind of discussion like this. And there was no ordinance that was kind of vehicle for that discussion either. It was sort of a discussion that played out in the media, but the assembly didn't really play a role. But ultimately, it is on us, I believe. It's part of our role to, at times, be involved in these issues because this is a municipal entity. And certainly, my constituents care a lot about this. When you increase charges downtown, when you start charging on Saturday, that means higher charges for people that drive in from Muldoon or from Avenue or from Sand Lake. And so it does impact my constituents. So I guess my first desire would be, and I appreciate Easy Park and Andrew coming today, I'd like to hear their plans for the summer and how they came to those plans.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Assemblymember Dunbar. Just a little bit of history. Years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, that predates me, ACDA Easy Park, the Board of Directors passed a resolution, or on the verge of passing a resolution raising parking rates. The mayor at that time opposed it. The board tabled it. We sat on existing rates for another 2 years. We have not had a rate increase in 8 years, from 2008 to 2016 until last summer. The board, once again, recognizing the fact that we own 3 30-year-old garages that demand millions of dollars in capital improvements every year, needed rate relief. We had not had a rate increase in 8 years. We raised rates as part of that overall parking strategy. Not only did we raise rates by a quarter, but we also proposed to implement Saturday enforcement. Now, as you know, Saturdays people like to say there's free parking on Saturday. I would argue there is not, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Our board proposed that we move forward with Saturday enforcement and a rate increase last year. The mayor called myself and Brian into a meeting, appealed to the board to say, look, I'm getting some pushback from local merchants. There's a concern about seasonality. I really need you to go back and justify this decision. Now, bear in mind, we had already done years of research. We have a national consultant who does this every day throughout various communities throughout the country. So this is a science. I'll tell you, before I started this job, I had no idea parking is a science. But there's a reason why when you come downtown on Saturday, there's nowhere to park. And the garages are empty. And there's a reason why when you come downtown on the weekdays, there's plenty of room to park on the streets and there's no rooms in the garages. Because on the weekends, streets are free, so people stay out of the garages. On the weekdays, when people are at work, people park in the garages, they stay out the streets because we're enforcing the streets. So it's a misperception. So parking is not really free on Saturday. Basically, we're pushing a third of the people into garages because those spaces are being occupied all day long. So we listened to the mayor, we went back, we huddled with our board. Brian's team came up with a 3-month strategy. We originally only suggested we get data for 6 weeks. We got it for 12, 3 solid months. We had an employee on the street all days on Saturday, chalking tires block by block, painstakingly gathering data to determine what cars are parked where and how long they're parked. We took that data, we formulated it into templates that our parking consultant had provided us. We sent it to our parking consultant, who then ran the numbers, and the numbers are staggering. On Saturday, the average space downtown turns over 3 times. It's supposed to turn over 7. You have 1 in 3 spaces occupied for the entire day downtown. This kills small merchants, especially on Saturday, which is arguably their busiest day of the year. This also plays into a long-running contentious argument between downtown merchants and the Anchorage market. I mean, the Anchorage market gets thousands of local visitors every Saturday and Sunday. They park downtown. You've got vendors who park downtown. These are the people who are taking up these valuable street side. I mean, imagine this as waterfront property. These are people who are taking up these spots all day and not allowing local merchants to generate that churn. You make money when the spaces turn over. We gathered this data for 3 months. We prepared a report. You have it in front of you. There's a memorandum. It shows very clear economic evidence that downtown merchants are being actually harmed. I know it's counterintuitive, but they're actually being harmed by the lack of Saturday enforcement because those spaces are staying occupied by whether it's downtown employees or people who show up on the weekends to volunteer at PAC events. I mean, we had testimony in stakeholder meetings that by 10 o'clock almost every open space downtown is taken. And that's taken by volunteers and vendors at Saturday market employees. I mean, then when you come downtown as a patron, as a customer, the first thing you say is there's nowhere to park. So we went back, launched the data, gathered the data. Then once we had the scientific data, which came out in November, we then reconvened for 4-month stakeholder meetings with downtown merchants. We included individual merchants, the Denina, we engaged public officials. We tried to cast the net as broad as possible. I mean, bear in mind, we have a legal responsibility to enforce parking rules. I mean, we don't write tickets because we like to. We write tickets because it's incredibly important to keep commerce rolling downtown. We're mainly concerned with loading zones, handicap zones, alleyways. We like commerce to keep churning. I'm not, Brian doesn't have his people hawking meters every 15 to 20 minutes to see if your meter's expired. We're focused on alleyways and loading zones to keep commerce moving. But enforcing metered parking is critical to keeping commerce moving downtown. I know it's counterproductive, especially when you've gotten it free, but it's not actually free when you consider the real economic data. For 4 months, we held stakeholders meetings. Brian engaged with the stakeholders, very thorough process. Again, we brought all of the work to our board of directors, who once again approved a pilot program. In meeting with the mayor and stakeholders, it was a compromise. We decided that what we would do to launch the pilot program is we would enforce the 2-hour minimum starting at 9 a.m. So if you come at 9 or 10 and you're there for 2 hours, that's fine. But according to the law, after 2 hours, you have to move your car. You can't let it sit there the entire day. So we feel like this is a reasonable compromise. It will allow us to go back and duplicate the exact same data on the exact same blocks to compare, and then we will reassess this winter. But we feel like there's a couple of things with regards to the history behind this process. Is we feel we've done more than enough stakeholder outreach. We feel the economic data and the science is there. We feel a lot of this, even according to our own public opinion polling, downtown parking is really one of the most misunderstood services there is. For instance, show of hands, did anybody read Elise's column yesterday about pricing downtown parking? She didn't park in our lots. She parked across the street from 49th Street Brewery in Diamond's parking lots. If she would have parked in my lot, it would have cost her $1 or $2 for 2 hours. That's part of the misperception. Brian doesn't control all of the parking downtown. We share the responsibility with Diamond, who not only charges twice as much as we do, they reinvest very little back into the community. So we have a responsibility of not only managing street parking, lot parking, garage parking, but we have a responsibility of working with stakeholders and reinvesting into the community. We feel the science is there. We feel the economic benefit to merchants are there. We feel we're doing this as a very slow roll. Bear in mind, again, this was proposed last year. We took another year to gather data. We're actually going to take another year to gather data, so it very well could be 2 or 3 years before we phase in paid Saturday enforcement. But right now, we're focused on the pilot program to do comparable data and to show downtown merchants that this is actually going to be better for their business. When that space opens up 7 times rather than 3 times on your store block, that means more people are coming in to buy your goods. We want to say from a public policy standpoint, there's a couple of issues that you know from my standpoint bother me from a public standpoint. You know, Easy Park, the parking agency was designed to insulate the agency from politics, designed to operate and manage city parking on best practices. That's what we try and do. While certainly our organization absolutely 100% agrees with the need to focus on reducing DUIs, we feel this ordinance does anything but. There's no scientific proof no evidence that this will prevent drunk driving. In fact, it restricts our ability to manage parking. We feel we have a good relationship with our stakeholders. Our public opinion polling is very strong. 75% of the people who come downtown say they find a parking space relatively easy. The people who give Easy Park the highest grades are the people who come downtown the most. If you come downtown more than 3 or 4 times a month, you give us B's or A's. Our public polling is stunning. Because it basically shatters all of those misperceptions out there. We manage and charge for public parking because it's an asset, and we are responsible by law to do it. So we feel like this ordinance impacts not only it impacts on our ability, but it impacts our ability to manage parking at a time when downtown is really poised to break what I would call 20, 30 years of stagnation. For the first time, this administration, an administration, has made downtown housing a focus. And with all the good work that the administration and my group is doing in the next year, you could very well see almost 200 housing units under construction here in downtown. Now is not the time to limit my ability to manage downtown parking. If you think parking's bad now, just wait till we get 200 residents. You got construction. You got people that live down here and their guests. You need a strong parking agency that's engaged with their stakeholders and engaged with the community, and we need to retain our ability to manage parking. We have several ongoing initiatives to address Assemblymember Dunbar's concern about drunk driving. I would point out that in many streets it's actually illegal to leave your car overnight because of plowing between 2 and 6. You'll see the signs. You're not supposed to park your car overnight. So on one hand, this ordinance really incentivizes behavior that actually breaks the law. Secondly, we think things like working with Uber and Lyft, creating special programs for downtown eateries and bar establishments that allow people to park for free overnight. Using our existing resources, our existing tools, our existing marketing channels to create a program that works, rather than set something in statute that just simply limits our ability at a time when managing parking is going to become more and more important downtown. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Brian, do you have anything else to add?
I'm here to answer any additional questions and support some of the things that are in the documents. Anything in particular in there that any assembly member has regarding the Kimley Forum memos that are there, which is our third-party consultant that reviewed a lot of the information and data. And to Andrew's point, it was right at the start of his, but the last time we did meet with this body, we did discuss some of our parking strategy price changes, and not every assembly member in this room was on the body at that time. But this has been a long process to arrive at the decision that we made.
Thank you, Brian. I want to let the minutes reflected Eric Cropper, just as well. Thank you. Of course.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you have before you the S version. For those of you who might have looked at the original version that I submitted this past week, as well as the AM that accompanies that. So I had a good meeting with Brian yesterday, and we weren't able to reach total comedy, but we, from that discussion, he had a couple of suggestions which I incorporated in the S version. The First is that I remove the term "and zones" from subsection C. Brian expressed to me that they might need to create some special residential parking zones, particularly if we increase the housing development as Andrew described, which I think a lot of us share that goal. And so that was a sort of inadvertent on my part that I didn't mean to restrict their ability to do that. The second thing is, when we had this discussion last summer, it was about pricing, and now they're talking about not pricing but just 2-hour enforcement, and that's something that I can support, and I want to support the pilot program they're going forward with this summer. And I also don't want to create confusion. Now, I still want to preserve this grace period. And I know that Andrew and Brian expressed that there isn't science to indicate that DUI is connected, but I think there's some common sense to it about the way the geography of Anchorage, the culture of people that come downtown. I provided you one anecdote, one article that I did find where something similar happened in an entertainment district in Florida, and in a lot of ways our downtown serves as our entertainment district as well. And so what I did in the S version is I went from noon or before noon, I dropped that back to 11. And I felt that, getting back downtown, if you're coming from Sand Lake or if you're coming from Muldoon, you can get back downtown by 11. But the other reason why I wanted to do this is because it syncs up with their pilot program on the 2-hour enforcement. So again, to reduce confusion in the public. Because Brian's expressed to me that they're going to start running that clock at 9 a.m., which is the typical hours of enforcement. So you start that 2-hour, you start the chalking at 9 a.m., which means the moment you get your first ticket is 11 a.m. And so that's why I want to, and so that would sync up with this idea of not charging before 11 a.m. They're not proposing charging anyway at this point, but they kind of want to preserve their power to charge at some point in the future. And I want to kind of plant a little bit of a flag that says, okay, but the mornings on Saturdays, in particular Saturdays and Sundays, is a grace period where you're going to have a little bit stronger justification if you want to be charging at that time. But it doesn't restrict their ability to do that chalking and to write those tickets. So again, it achieves their goal, which is to increase turnover. Now, they've expressed to me, and I think they said in the press, they're not trying to raise revenue, at least at this point. They're trying to increase turnover in the spots. And this ordinance in no way restricts that, because it allows them to continue doing that 2-hour enforcement. And because I, in the S version, brought it to 11, I think that will prevent any confusion on the public as well. So that's why I put forward the S version. I intend to bring it forward again on public hearing at our next meeting, and we'll have an opportunity to vote on it. But a couple of other things. Well, actually, maybe Chris, I don't know if you want to talk to the snow points or the people getting towed when it snows or when it doesn't snow. A lot of what Andrew is saying, I agree with. I agree that they are doing innovative things to change downtown, and I think that our assembly is working with them on a lot of things. We are pushing forward with some housing projects. We are improving multimodal transportation. We're improving bicycle infrastructure. We're changing the way that buses operate. We've allowed more taxi permits. Uber and Lyft is kind of coming in regardless of what we want to do, but there are going to be these more opportunities. And that is in no way in conflict, I think, with this idea of, at least for the time being, preserving this grace period for people that happen to still be driving to downtown. Because I'm hoping that some of those things, like bicycle infrastructure, like Uber and Lyft, like better busing, will actually lead less people to drive downtown. So we kind of have countervailing forces there. But anyway, that's the ordinance, and happy to hear anybody's thoughts.
We've got some questions. Mr. Peterson, you're first, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just wondering, I know I was on your board, so I've been to several meetings. I know you did studies, and approximately a third of the spaces that were being used on Saturdays were from employees, from businesses. And I was wondering if you come up with any incentives or programs to try to get those employees to park in the garage to open up those spaces so that customers can come and park out. It would be more convenient for them to do business downtown.
To the chair, Senator Peterson, thank you very much. That's a nice segue. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago we just won a national award for one of our employee pricing programs. Last year in July, when we rolled out the additional, we raised the rates, we also discounted worker, for instance, if you work in the mall, you can get a discount up to 70%, I believe it is, 70%. You provide us documentation, you come up, instead of paying $100 a month, you're paying $30 a month for parking. So we give a 70% discount to workers that qualify in the mall, anywhere downtown. The challenge is, because on Saturday, there's no enforcement, even though they're paying for monthly parking in the garage Monday through Friday, they're still parking on the street on Saturday, because there's no enforcement. So even with the reduced, very attractive monthly parking fees for employees and those making a lower wage downtown, on Saturday, it doesn't matter. It's still free. It's free for you, it's free for me, it doesn't matter. So, I mean, the programs have worked, they've been highly effective, but on Saturday, they're new.
Yes, Mr. Peterson. Thank you. Mr. Wilson, sir.
I got a couple here. Why 2 hours? We've got a bunch of emails and people say, well, that's not enough time to go to dinner and to go watch a show at the PAC. So,
Well, they're the existing time limits that are already on the meters downtown. So we have 2-hour limited meters and 10-hour limited meters. So there's already a mix of that. Those time limits were established a long time ago and are done through the traffic engineer department. We can review some of those if there are areas that don't have longer term options. And part of our project this summer is to analyze downtown and all the time limits as they are and going through the traffic engineer to make any adjustments that we need to make. But the current mix is 2 hours in areas that are highly congested with businesses like 4th Avenue, and on the outskirts, mostly there's 10-hour options as well. So there's a mix already.
And just to point out, because the PAC events are normally held after 6, we don't charge after 6. And another thing I want to point out, again, the misperceptions about how we manage parking. The comment in the article this morning about how it's cost you $20 to park for a PAC event, not true. Our event parking is $5.
So with all this, even your 2-hour limit after 6 o'clock, that's not going to be efficient. Okay, that makes a big difference.
I mean, we stopped enforcing parking at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, then, so if we went with Forrest's recommendation, say 11 a.m., are there morning, I think the malls are probably slower then, are there morning events that would be negatively impacted if a lot of cars were left behind after the events on Friday? Or is it early enough it's not an issue?
Saturday morning, there's a number of charity runs. There's a number of events that cause congestion and street closures. There's the Saturday market, I believe, starts before 11. It could encourage folks to park in those spaces in those hours and impact businesses and create that same stagnation. Our hope is that we'll learn some information out of our pilot program with trying to create an over on the 2-hour limit, but there's no incentive until 11 for folks to have to move their car that could impact business that's taking place on Saturday, yes.
So maybe to preempt this, could you just study that? You could just, if this doesn't happen, I don't know, I guess you have to make if you just announce that you won't be charging before 11, do it for 6 months and see if there's a lot of cars. People who went out the night before sitting there.
Yeah, I guess as part of this pilot program, one of the things that I talked with Forrest about in our conversation was we absolutely can collect data about the number of cars that are left overnight as a part of our data collection on Saturdays. We didn't do that in the original study because our focus wasn't that aspect of things, but it's definitely data that we could compile to see how many cars remained and what percentage of meters are occupied from vehicles that were left there from the night before.
Thank you.
Mr. Constant.
Yeah, no, I just queued up on what was suggested. I did see the email as well from the person who was talking about working at a show on the weekend and having problems with parking issue. And in fact, almost every weekend day that there is a big show in town, there are matinee shows happening in the day. And so on the weekends, there are actually conflicting uses relative to those complaints and concerns. And so in any event moving forward, that is an interesting area of concern. And that could be resolved, I don't know how, but I find interesting that on the 1st of this month, I got a call from Mr. Dunbar about, hey, it was the morning pretty early, I'm going to do this to your neighborhood, I thought you might want to know. And then that afternoon, I attended a meeting with the parking authority simultaneously and concurrently and without coordination. these two movements happen on the same day. And so I want everyone to know that this wasn't a response and a kind of a return, it's just kind of natural timing. It's kind of interesting. The issue that I see that isn't addressed here, and I've heard about from both sides of this conversation, is the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. issue. And that we have kind of an open season tone climate downtown for those hours. And so while it's not so much concern that we're inducing people to do something illegal at 9 to 11 in the morning by staying overnight, it's that we actually incentivize tow companies to come and take people and then say in the morning you can stay here. We're, I think, going to create a conflict in our own perception, our own efforts. If we're saying you can stay from 9 to 11 because we don't want you drinking and driving, but you can't stay from 2 to 6. Right? That's an issue that I think we have to figure out an answer to before we create a morning incentive that says you can stay from 9 till noon. Because I know a number of people who have been towed from 2 to 6 in the morning. In fact, I've offered a number of times. A number of my friends will just come and drive you home because those tow companies, that's how they make their dinner. And so I think there's some missing part here that probably needs to be addressed. And question that was brought up, I had lunch with Brian today, that I think is a question that's worth considering is, wouldn't it be smart for us to ask the administration of Easy Park to propose their solutions to the question before we run through a quick solution that might not address all of the problems? And I think a thoughtful approach is always better than a fast approach. And that's my thoughts on the question.
Thank you, sir. I will tell you that we did address the whole towing industry about a year ago. We cleaned that up remarkably. Because I may not be perfect now, but believe it's something like it used to be.
Right, and it's 2 to 6, our sign says you can't park here. Every sign almost in the downtown says 2 to 6, no parking from October to April.
Right.
And so then we'll essentially have signage that says, but you can't park on Saturday and Sunday from 9 to 11.
So what happens then here?
Right.
Cars visible?
There's a disconnection in there that seems to be asking for a solution.
Mr. Dunbar, sir.
Yeah, a couple points on that. First, John asked about the number of cars left over the night before, and we'll call it cause congestion. I think in the conversation that Brian and I had, the belief is that it's a relatively small number of cars that are being left over, and hopefully your data will show that. And with these kind of public safety concerns like I have here, one DUI, so it's a relatively low frequency event, it's a relatively low number of cars that are being left over. But the potential damage of that DUI is so high, that's why I'm worried about just a couple people every night making that decision in the wrong direction, right? And that's kind of the motivation. To Chris's point, so first of all, it's October to April when you're talking about those tow zones. And we have much more nightlife downtown in the summer months, right? For fairly obvious reasons. The sun's go out, but it's 15 below. And I think there's also a sort of sense of justice. For those of us who've been towed, and I've been towed several times, not just in this city, what's the worst? The worst part, not just a couple times. The worst part is when you feel you've been wrongly towed. And I feel like if there's a big snowfall and you left your car and you got towed, I think most people understand why it happened. Because the snowplows came through, they had to come through, and you screwed up, But if it's a perfectly clear July day and you have left your car downtown because you tried to do the right thing and didn't drink, and you get towed, I think that is a real problem. And same if you get a ticket, right? So I know what you're saying about creating these sort of dueling incentives, but I think people are smart enough to kind of figure out why we do the towing when we do it versus when we don't. And I think also, those towing people when it isn't snowing is something we might also want to address. That's something that we, like Dick said, we have some bad habits in the towing industry where they go out and sort of predatory tow people, I believe. Not just in this case, in a lot of cases. In fact, we heard, we had some evidence this morning about how state law changed to prevent excessive impound with the APD. And I've done ride-alongs where, the tow companies are Johnny on the spot and they make a bunch of money. So I guess I disagree with you on that point. And this is an ongoing conversation with us and with Easy Park. And I don't want to portray Easy Park as like the villains here. I know what they're trying to do. They're absolutely right. They are removed from the political process to a certain degree because they have to make decisions that are inherently unpopular. And which is why, I didn't put forward an ordinance to like reverse the decrease in charges last year because I thought that made sense. But I don't think that this grace period, this morning grace period, is too much to ask. And frankly, I've been getting a lot of calls and emails on this, and they're all in the opposite direction. They're all, you should do the whole day, And I'm not going to do that because I respect what they're trying to do here. And I don't want to screw up their pilot program or their 2-hour enforcement. But I don't think it's too much to ask to, at least for the time being, until they can come and change the code back, restrict charging for these 2 cars.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarifying question. Going back to the examples you gave about getting towed in the summer versus the winter, is your concern that people are staying overnight or leaving cars overnight in the summertime and coming back the next day and it's been towed?
No, I was just responding to Chris' point. That's all.
Okay, because I wanted to make sure that was clear that if you leave a car overnight on a night where they're charging the next day, so it'd be a weeknight,
Yeah.
you're not automatically towed the next morning. You're issued a citation,
Right.
perhaps, but you're not towed. So it's not a matter of people coming out to pick up a car after partying too hard on a Friday or Saturday night and they've been towed.
Yeah. Can you get towed for the street sweepers?
Absolutely.
You can get towed on a weeknight, weekend, anytime from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. during the winter from October to April.
And I'm sorry to interrupt again, just because we have a lot of experience in this. So you asked a question about special events and what would the impact be if the public believes that they're safe to leave a car overnight, and so they come downtown, they have a great time, they leave their car, and they come back the next day, and it's Skinny Raven Run, they'll get towed. They will get towed. It has nothing to do with this. It has to do with the special event permits that these events put on. And after a decade of doing events where we go out and we put signs on meters days in advance advertising this, there's always 2-3 cars every time you close a road that have taken that, has made that decision to stay, and they get towed anyway.
Quick follow-up, and then that'll be the last part.
Go ahead, Chris.
So this 11 a.m. time, Part C in the establishment section, I don't understand what we're doing here then. If it allows for 2 hours of parking, which is from 9 to 11, under the rules, then they can ticket at 11 moving forward, and this changes the time frame to not allow ticketing until 11.
No, they're not going to be charging anyway. This ordinance
It's not
is
charging, it's ticketing. Here it says, no permit shall be required, right? Or no payment or permit. And so basically, no right to stay past 2 hours, right? So I'm not talking about the payment. I'm just talking about the ability to sit in a spot from 9 until 11 is already allowed. And then at 11,
You're right. This maintains the status quo from 9 to 11. It's in no way in conflict with their pilot program.
and it then maintains the status quo, other than, it doesn't stop them after 11.
No.
Maintains the status quo, and it doesn't stop them. And so my question is, effectively, what does it do?
It prevents them from ticketing at 9 a.m. Because if they were to go to a charging model, they could write that ticket at 9 a.m.
Mr. Peterson. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I was wondering if Easy Park has ever thought about an overnight special program for people to get them out of the, between, say, October and April, to get people off the street. Is that a possibility?
Well, I mean, again, to the chair, Assemblymember Peterson, great question. I mean, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to change behavior. Right? I mean, we are trying to change people's parking behavior, and I think this really fits into the larger vision of downtown. I mean, people want to blame parking as kind of the reason downtown ebbs and flows. That's not why downtown ebbs and flows. Downtown ebbs and flows for completely different reasons. Has nothing to do with parking. So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change behavior, trying to change perception. We're not just on street. We have lots and garages. We've talked about offering incentive programs. Look, if you're going to come downtown and you're going to be drinking, park in one of our lots. We'll give you a get out of jail free card, something like that. I mean, we have, and I guess that's our argument, Assemblymember Peterson, is we have the resources and the tools and the ability to create different marketing programs to specifically target these folks that come downtown, want to have a good time, don't want to have to worry about driving home. We have the tools to market to those people and to offer offers to hold them harmless without really going in and changing the law to maintain the status quo. I mean, again, this is more about us trying to instill faith in you about our ability to manage parking that I do very well, to continue managing through this. We always have to answer to you. When City Hall catches cold, we start sneezing. I always like to say in my office. My goal, Brian's goal, Linda's goal, we don't want unhappy customers because unhappy customers don't come back downtown. We want people to come downtown. We want it to be easy, affordable, accessible. So, changing behaviors, getting people into our lots and garages overnight, giving them a freebie if we need to. We've got to start to think about downtown differently as we kind of move towards a larger vision of people, kind of downtown being engaged 24 hours a day, not just 10 hours a day from 9 to 6.
And to add to that, we've actually done some programs similar to that already. New Year's Eve, we do flat rates. You cut it off after the fireworks go off. You pay a flat rate in any of the garages that we charge $5, and you're there through the holiday free of charge. We call it the Park It and Leave It program. And we've also done coupon codes for special discounts to allow people to park at surface lots, say after 6 and through the remainder of the next day for things like tire pump crawl. So we'd be happy to facilitate additional programs that target Friday and Saturday activities through our parking technology.
And to touch on that, I mean, one of the things that Brian and his team has done so well the last 3 years is invest in technology. I mean, at the end of 2014, we had written, I think, $690,000 worth of citations. This year, we're on track to do $360,000. I mean, we've cut citation revenue by 45% because the investments in technology have made it easier to pay at the meter. So you're at a bar or you're at a yoga class on Saturday morning and your meter's going to expire. Right here, you hit our app, you plug in how much money you want, and you don't even have to leave. I mean, it's all done online. I mean, you don't have to go back to the meter to feed the meter. I mean, that's what technology is doing for us. So, I know the debate about 2 hours or 3 hours, but if I'm at 2 hours and I think I'm getting close, I can pay by phone. I don't even have to interrupt. It's going to take me 3.5 minutes, period. So, we can do that similar thing with coupons where, you're going to be drinking overnight. Maybe you go online, download a Friday night coupon, allows you to, park in a lot for one flat fee.
Mr. Wilson.
So I guess I misunderstood. So if you have a 2-hour meter, I can just keep plugging it and stay where I want to be. But that's what you're saying with the phone.
One time. You
But
can plug
that's,
one time.
the phone can be used to pay in a service slot where there isn't that same time limitation.
Right.
Or at a 10-hour meter, for example. So the time limitation is separate from being able to maintain it.
Okay, so if it's a 2-hour meter, I can't do that on my phone to get a third hour.
Correct. Right. But if you're at a 10-hour meter at a service lot, you can pay for 3 days at the service lot.
Mr. Constant.
So this idea of a parking coupon, you're talking about your app, that's great, but what about utilizing the bar ownership as a means of promoting this?
We'd be happy to work with bar owners. I know in other communities, there's some research that I've looked at where they do say like wood and nickel programs or placards for cars that bar owners at closing time to distribute to patrons to put in their car that would allow us to identify those patrons that were leaving their car overnight. We can also work with them as we're launching the programs to distribute those coupon codes and give somebody the ability to get a discount in a surface lot so they can put their car in the lot and not have to worry about it the next day. I think, like my conversation with Forrest, like we're focusing on 1,700 metered spaces and we control 6,000 spaces downtown. I'm happy to offer those other spaces an opportunity to address this concern.
Other questions, Assembly members? Yes, Ms. Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so I'm completely clear, and I think this may be a question for you, Mr. Dunbar, this proposed ordinance has nothing to do pilot program, and that doesn't require any additional legislation. This is just to ensure that the pilot program isn't enforced until 11 a.m.
No, it doesn't even do that.
No.
So, last summer they were talking about charging on Saturdays. And so
Right.
when I was developing this ordinance, I thought that was still the model they were going forward with. And I don't know if they've changed it or I think they had already planned to do it with using the 2-hour enforcement instead of the charging. So they're kind of parallel. And I changed mine just to prevent confusion. But really, even if this had said noon, it wouldn't prevent them from doing their pilot program. Because their pilot program is not based on charging, it's based on chalking and the 2-hour rule.
Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, just one other comment to Mr. Helper. I'm still wrapping my head around the idea that enforcing Saturday parking is actually in the best interest of the merchants. I read the article yesterday and was thinking, gee, this is really hard on folks with fixed income. It's going to drive businesses to South Anchorage. Maybe that's not bad. But so that's a real reversal in my mind that this is actually something that would benefit the merchants.
It is, but it's through the chair, Assemblymember France. I mean, you're right, and it's just one piece, and I think that's kind of where that's kind of where we've struggled when it comes to downtown. Is we always kind of look at it piece by piece rather than a holistic approach. Now you have an administration that has got housing, got ADP with Clean and Safe. We're trying to do some things downtown, so it's all things working together. Parking is critical to downtown; it keeps commerce going. But at the same time, I mean, the reality is when you compare our pricing to other cities, it's very comparable. I mean, if not less expensive. At the Fifth Avenue Garage, we give you already an hour free. I mean, we've subsidized almost $200,000 in free parking over the last year because we pulled back Saturday enforcement and kept the hour free. So there's give and takes. We just want to do what's right for downtown and use best management. And we know sometimes telling people you have to pay for something after decades of getting it for free, we know sometimes that doesn't go over very well. But there's a reason why we've kind of ebbed and flowed and we haven't made any progress. And I think we're getting to that point now where, again, I look at this ordinance. I think there's a lot of moving pieces. I would simply, ask the body to have faith in our ability to manage parking. We're responsive. If there's anything, we think that we've done a good job, not just with our stakeholder process over the last couple of months, but winning over those stakeholders who were really vocally opposed to this program. I mean, the 2-hour enforcement was really a compromise with some of our more vocal critics who are now very pleased and are pleased that the process worked and that we're going to collect data to make sure that the outcomes measure what the desired success is.
Any other questions from any members?
I have a comment. I think I've learned a lot about parking down here, and of course we have the luxury of parking out front of the meetings. But my typical routine, I really rarely come downtown. I think maybe a dozen times a year, and I park at the park strip if you want to remember fine. But I think for most people, they come down rarely. They're going to a dinner or a show, and they don't know about all these special deals. 3 hour, I don't know that stuff. That's if you work down here, people know these. They take advantage of, and then they're happy with your work. But 90% of the population doesn't. They just come down, and if you can't park right in front of the door, I have to walk 100 yards. That's insane. So this is typical. People think. So that's all they know. So that means there's no parking. If they have to walk 2 blocks, that's equivalent to no parking. So it sounds like you have some great plans. People who know them, they're great. The average person doesn't. That's why I think we're getting feedback that this is bad because they know simple things. No parking, expensive, weekdays, free on weekends.
Right.
That's it.
But I think you're absolutely. I think we've all done it, right? I mean, before I took this job, you come downtown on Saturday, and it's like there's nowhere to park, right? But then when I took this job, Brian's like, "Well, here, let me show you something," and he showed me the difference, right? And then from an outsider, it's like, "Okay, yeah, it is a science." In the challenges, I think in one thing to bear in mind, we contribute back to the municipality. I mean, I just signed off on a check for almost $500,000. We're going to contribute under the tax cap, and our growth and our success is your growth and your success, and the city's success, and downtown success. So, I mean, again, we will huddle with Assemblymember Dunbar, we'll huddle with anybody who's got ideas about parking downtown, but, my overall pitch to the body would be, please just, at a time like when so many exciting things are happening, don't restrict my ability because of a fear of what might happen. Let us try and manage the problem ahead of the curve.
I think part of the difference is the old parking authority was universally hated by everybody. The old parking authority was hated by everybody because they took their sanction to go to garage sales at schools. Christmas time, they gave tickets to people for expired plates and everything under the sun. And the public's reaction was, we don't want to see them exist. And so they cut them back tremendously. And they're trying now to recover. If anything that's even closely aligned to the old parking authority, people in Anchorage hate it. So you guys are overcoming a big obstacle.
But a lot of the credit, Mr. Chair, goes to Brian and his team, because I will tell you that in our office, our priority is keeping the zones, in the loading zones, the handicap zones, the alleyways clear so business can operate. I mean, we enforce meters because that's the law, and we're charged by you to enforce the law. But by and large, we want people to come downtown. We want it to be easy, affordable, and accessible, period.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had an idea about how you might be able to use the parking ferry. Use the parking ferry to make a public service announcement about some of your programs so that people could be educated about when you can park for free or what are the discounts for events and that type of thing. Because everyone remembers that if you've been here very long, you know the whole saga about the parking ferry. And so that would,
over there, she likes that idea. She's
But we did name the garage area after Letty.
I'm aware of that.
She was the large parking ferry. Yes, Eric.
I didn't say that, just I want that clear on the record. Mr. Weddleton, I want to know where you want us to park motorcycles downtown. So we have to do, okay, and then Chris, you.
That's a good question. So motorcycle parking can be difficult, and our equipment doesn't beg for motorcycles to enter some of the environments like the parking garages. Like, it's not as safe for a motorcycle to enter with the old equipment that we have. But the available on-street parking spaces and surface lot parking spaces are available for motorcycles.
You should just do a whole car space. Like, we don't have dedicated little ones.
Correct. And in the areas in some of the surface lots we do, and you actually pay a cheaper rate. There is a
For
motorcycle
long
rate for parking for multiple hours. From the on-street standpoint, there could be things we work on with the traffic engineer to discuss allocating additional spaces, especially in the summertime where people really like to ride their motorcycles. And then in the parking garage ramps, what I'd like to do over time is, as we replace the equipment, have some other options integrated into that so that it's safe. Because right now it's not safe for a motorcycle towards those facilities. But we absolutely can explore other ideas if there's ideas that anybody in this body has. It is a challenge to make sure we accommodate any kind of vehicle, and bicycles included, like Mr. Dunbar.
We're going to have a challenge to that coming up. Mr. Williams?
I mean, I haven't parked in it often, but I think I've ridden in every park. I don't remember anything dangerous. If you can tell me where I'm going to pass
The gate equipment themselves are a little older, and because it's a one-axle vehicle instead of a two-axle vehicle, it's a two-wheel vehicle, potentially the gate could come down on you. If you have a larger bike, a motorcycle that's like a cruiser, you tend to, the sensors read that better, but it actually could knock you off your motorcycle.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't aware. So once I thought, maybe just see common sense, is you have like some of those rounding things, you have the little parking stops.
Right.
You have this big area here. It's perfect for a motorcycle.
Yeah.
The car's going to hit me, and I got a ticket.
We absolutely can look at a couple of different options. It's a tough one because it's a different size vehicle, and the way the spaces are spaced out on street or at a certain measurement that isn't conducive for motorcycle parking. It doesn't mean that we can't advocate for that change.
Mr. Middleton?
Yeah, on that subject, I've had a number of complaints from motorcycle people that they would love a solution downtown, and I think that if any discussion or kind of investigation of that goes along, I would suggest working with the kind of bike plan and coming up with some kind of a shared facility between bikes and motorcycles that can be more efficient utilization, incentivize people to ride instead of drive. So I would definitely like some investigation there, because I have had a number of calls in the last 6 weeks about where do I park. People get mad at motorcycles for parking in regular parking spots. They get yelled at because, hey, that's enough room for a car. Why are you taking up that space? and there's just not a good alternative in the downtown for that.
So anybody's gonna want their own space then.
Yeah.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, just last comments, because I appreciate the discussion we've had, and I'm going to reiterate this on the 27th too. But I appreciate what Brian and Andrew are doing in terms of trying to shake loose more turnover downtown on Saturdays and Sundays. And that's what we're doing with the pilot program using the 2-hour enforcement rule. I just want to stress again, my ordinance does not in any way prevent that, particularly the S version. It prevents charging, it doesn't prevent them using the 2-hour rule to increase turnover.
That's all. Our meeting is adjourned. Thanks for being here.